We often overlook or normalize things in our lives which cause us discomfort or are beyond our understanding of the universe. A very grand statement to make at the beginning of a story centered on working as an inbound call customer service agent. However, it's something I had to do frequently during my job. I cannot be specific about who exactly I was operating for, as I have since climbed up and away from calls, but in the same company. However, I can tell you that we only ever received calls into the center, and it was maybe 2 to 3 calls every hour. We were 24 hours too, which meant that during the small hours, you were looking at maybe 2 calls on a night shift, if you were lucky. The calls themselves were pretty simple. Again, without specifics, we were a government-funded contact number who could legally only take the information the client had and pass it on to the relevant department. The fact that the job existed was a farce, but it was about minimum wage and night shift was time and a half, so I soldiered on. We were teased in training about nightmare calls, such as a woman ringing in to inform us that she was terminally ill and broke down on the phone, or the girl who threatened to kill herself, leading to the operator listening as the police burst into her home to the sound of, "I can't believe you actually called them." The idea of these calls was wild, but normal. Well, normal in the sense that it is based in reality. I could understand those calls. I switched from part-time day shifts onto full-time night shift cycle after I left my university degree and figured that I was a nocturnal anyway. I may as well make some money out of it. The first incident was about 6 months into the new shift pattern and wasn't forewarned like the girl who cried suicide. It isn't uncommon to have people hang up on you. However, when I experienced it 6 times, one after each other at 2 a.m., I assumed technical malfunction as the caller ID was blank, not even caller unknown. I set down my headset and went to find my team leader, which during the day is as easy as shouting over a desk. At 2 a.m., however, it's quite the adventure. I eventually located my boss chowing down in the break room and asked him to come check the phone. However, by the time we returned, the calls had stopped coming. At this point, it was just me and Mark, my team leader, so I explained the situation. He said, "You answered each call in just silence?" I nodded to judge his facial expression to see if it was something I'd done wrong. I quickly asked, "Yeah, nothing on the other end. They just hung up right away." Mark got really quiet after that. The only way I could have described his mannerisms was like someone who had just been reminded of the death of a relative. A few more moments of awkward silence passed before I thought it best to prod for more information. "Mark, has this happened before, or—" I trailed off because at this stage, I still assumed it was a technical error. As with most stories of this nature, I was quite wrong. Mark explained to me at 2 a.m., almost to the second, calls start to flood into the center, one after each other. "Not every night," he added rather hastily, almost as if he'd given this speech 1,000 times, and every time the person on the other end had quit on the spot. "The call gaps get bigger. Did you notice they took longer to hang up?" Mark inquired. I hadn't noticed, but when I thought back to my attempts to call out across the phone line, they had taken longer to hang up in the final few times. "Yeah," I murmured, not wishing to know any more, but consumed with morbid curiosity. In a campfire spooky tale style, Mark regaled me with the tale of the 2 a.m. caller, which at the start sounded like a prank, but now I know to be fact. In his own words, "The silence gets longer before the line dies, but if you keep answering, the silence ends and they don't hang up." That was a grand tale, a single line which he refused to elaborate, adding only, "Do not keep answering." Now me and Mark are old friends, and even at one point, almost a flickering romance, so the whole boss-employee dynamic never really worked on me and him. This time, though, he seemed so stern, so serious. As a call came in, I jumped out of my skin, though thankfully it was from a known source, and was a genuine inquiry rather than a phantom as Mark had portrayed. I honestly put it out of my head as Mark trying to melt my brain, and carried on with my night, eventually bidding him a good morning, and going home to sleep from 8 a.m. until hopefully 5 p.m. I really am nocturnal. Time went on and I never received another hang-up call at 2 a.m. until it was Mark and I on again. We settled into our chairs, unpacked our snacks, and played some cards to pass the time, interrupted only once for a short 3-minute call. Every 2 hours at midnight, the team leader has to call through to head office to simply let them know that all is well, and so off he trod to his office on the other end of the call floor. I checked to watch, assuming it was his midnight call, when in fact, time had gotten away from me, and it was approaching 2. Suddenly, the hair on the back of my arm stood on end, and I almost sensed what came next. My headset lit up and vibrated, signaling an incoming call, and without thinking, I placed it on my head. "Good morning," I began my usual script, but the person on the other end hung up. Again, another call. The same thing, yet this time, they lingered. Then my eyes widened as the last shift rushed back into my memory. "Do not keep answering." Mark's words echoed in my head as the caller hung up once more, immediately calling back. My finger hovered over the answer key, half of me fearful and the other half desperate to call Mark's bluff. After all, he'd gone away exactly when this person had to call. I answered the call. All I remember is the screaming, though not a single scream. It was as if someone was howling in a cavern. The reverb was... Well, it was the last thing I recall, as Mark jolted me awake, informing me I had fallen asleep at my desk. I was visibly shaking, unable to comprehend what just happened, and if I was perhaps losing my mind. "Mark, I tried to explain, but Mark simply looked at me in the eyes once more. "You fell asleep at your desk." With that, he unplugged my headset and handed me some paperwork to fill out, walking away as if nothing happened. I got the calls throughout my time at that job, and never again did I answer them, and even warned a new guy to do the same, realizing why Mark couldn't tell me more, and why I couldn't tell the newbie more. Whatever was said to me on that call, beyond the screaming, is in me, somewhere. I know it. Mark got drunk one night following the shift, and we spoke briefly about it before he seemed genuinely fearful for his safety. He said that after the screaming, if you can stand it, you are spoken to. Perhaps not as chilling to read and type, but in the prospect of a voice to match that scream. As I said at the beginning, we normalize the weird to protect our own minds, and as I'm sure anyone else who has worked in a call center will tell you, some calls can be a nightmare. Little did I know they were being incredibly literal.